Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I used to think my neighbor was just an average guy, someone I could trust. He had even babysat my kids when they were younger, which was a tremendous help for me as a single father struggling to find a work-life balance. But as time went on, I never would have imagined the dark secrets lurking behind his seemingly ordinary facade. The unsettling chain of events began when I returned home early from a business trip. Upon entering my house, I immediately sensed something was amiss. There were signs of a hasty exit. Running footsteps and a slammed back door echoed through the empty rooms. Panic consumed me as I rushed to the kitchen, only to discover a chaotic scene. The stove had been left on its highest setting, setting ablaze everything in its path. Frantically, I dialed emergency services, and they arrived just in time to save my home from complete destruction. However, what perplexed the police was the absence of forced entry. It was clear this wasn't the work of a common thief. Someone had deliberately broken into my house with a mysterious purpose. Fear gripped me, making it difficult to leave for my next business trip. I took extra precautions, securing all windows and reinforcing the locks on my doors. In an attempt to catch the intruder in the act, I installed cameras throughout my home, providing a sense of security in my absence. Days later, as I sat in a distant city, my phone buzzed with an alert from the cameras. Heart pounding, I witnessed my neighbor brazenly walk through my front door as if it were his own. Shock and disbelief washed over me. He nonchalantly made himself at home, watching TV, using my bathroom, and even cooking in my kitchen. Determined to put an end to this intrusion, I contacted the police immediately, providing them with real-time evidence of the trespasser's actions. On my way back home, I received updates from the police. They apprehended my neighbor, but things took an even more bizarre turn. They revealed that he possessed a key to my house, suggesting the possibility that he had been entrusted with house-sitting duties. Confusion clouded the investigation, and it was evident that my neighbor's mental state was compromised. The police, suspecting substance abuse, transferred him to a psychiatric hospital to assess his fitness to stand trial. The legal proceedings proved to be challenging. After extensive evaluation, it was determined that he was indeed mentally fit to face charges of trespassing and arson. His motive remained a perplexing enigma. The court decided to place him in the hospital, focusing on his treatment and well-being, rather than sentencing him to jail. Throughout the legal battle, my neighbor's lawyer attempted to shift blame and minimize the consequences. They claimed that his actions were accidental and urged me to drop the charges. Frustration grew within me, knowing that he had deliberately broken into my home and caused the devastating fire. My lawyer reassured me, pointing out the irrefutable evidence and the lack of a legitimate defense. With a determined resolve, we pressed forward. Ultimately, the civil lawsuit concluded in my favor, and a judgment was issued for my neighbor to pay $20,000 in restitution for the damages to my kitchen. However, victory proved bittersweet as the realization hit that he had no means to fulfill his financial obligation. The house was in his sister's name, leaving him without assets to compensate me. It was a stark reminder that even a favorable outcome in court couldn't guarantee justice. Nevertheless, I found solace in the fact that my neighbor was receiving the necessary help in the psychiatric hospital. I no longer had to live in constant fear, wondering if he would violate my home again. The keys were forcibly taken from him, and my trust in the neighborhood gradually began to heal. As time passed, I continued to rely on my security cameras, ever watchful for any signs of his return. The eerie episode served as a poignant reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and a neighbor can harbor the most unimaginable secrets. While financial restitution eluded me, the closure of knowing he was confined and undergoing treatment offered a semblance of peace. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is a story about my neighbors and was relayed to me through my dad since I was too young to remember any of it. In the early 90s, my family lived in a lower middle-class neighborhood. Our neighbors were very poor, with about 5 kids, but extremely nice. They couldn't afford to have heating installed in their house, so they relied on using firewood that the father got from some of his friends at work during the winter. Winter came and their father started using the firewood. After a few weeks of freezing temperatures, he started to notice that every night some of his firewood would go missing. Now we had these other neighbors who weren't the greatest, and by that, I mean they were complete a-holes. They had frequent police visits for noise violations and who knows what else. They let their kids throw rocks at passing cars, and they were pretty well known for having stolen from other neighbors in the past. So, back to the family having their firewood stolen. After about a week of firewood going missing, the father went over to the a-hole's house and asked if they had been taking the firewood. They denied it, and since there wasn't anything the father could do about it legally, he came up with a plan. He found the nicest piece of wood he could find, drilled a hole in it, filled it with those quarter stick of dynamite fireworks from earlier that year, glued the hole shut, and placed the piece of wood at the top of his wood pile. Sure enough, the piece of wood was gone the next day. About a week later, the neighborhood was woken up by a big bang, and the a-hole kids were running out of the house exclaiming, "Our fireplace just exploded!" Luckily, no one was injured. My dad tells me that when he looked outside, the a-hole neighbors had what he describes as a Looney Tunes-ish hole in their chimney, with soot all over their lawn and presumably their family room. The next one is a petty revenge story. Friday night, I came home from work to find someone on our block was having a large party, and someone decided they were entitled to park in my driveway. Keep in mind, my driveway is a single-car width lined with a retaining wall on both sides and a garage at the end. It's essentially impossible for a tow truck to come pull them out without causing property damage. Seeing this and the lack of street parking, I took this as a cue to park right behind them in my driveway. A few hours went by, and their entitled parker was now knocking at my door, demanding I move my car so she could leave. Since they were being demanding, I informed them that I had been drinking and would not move my car. The entitled parker then decided to call the police to get them to force me to move. When the police knocked on my door, I made sure to grab a beer from the fridge before I answered to talk to the officer. I informed him that after I got home, I was unwinding and had been drinking and was in no shape to drive. At this point, their hands were tied because they couldn't tow her car out. I'm in no shape to drive, and I'm legally parked in my driveway. I ended up telling the entitled parker that since it was a long weekend, I would be on a weekend-long bender, and they could come move my car after I go to work on Tuesday. The next one is a petty revenge story. I got mad all over again writing this because of the sheer amount of disrespect from Total Wine Management. I have the receipt for this order too. There's a specific wine I used to pair with food. The closest Total Wine that had it was a 60-mile drive, and it was storming out. I wanted it for the holidays, because most likely I was going to be cooped up inside. So I drove over. This used to be my typical Total Wine until I moved 2 counties away. Anyways, I went in and picked up the wine and got some other stuff for holiday parties. I was in there maybe an hour and it came time to check out. The cashier asked me for my ID, so I gave it to her. Then she tells me she needs to see the ID of the other person I was with. Now I'm confused and say I'm alone. She says, "Well, I have to go get my manager. Okay, fine?" So he comes out to tell me that she told him I was with someone, and they need to come back and bring their ID, or they won't sell it to me. I told him I wasn't with anyone. He asks to see my ID, looks at it and says, "Well, unfortunately, you look young." At this point, I'm like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "You can come back tomorrow alone." I find it extremely disrespectful to tell someone they look young while you're holding their ID in your hand. Not to mention, I've been shopping at that exact location for about 4 years and have never had a problem. So I told him about how I drove there and have been shopping there for years. I even have a second form of ID, but he was just kind of giggling and saying no. So I left very angry, and it was late around 9 p.m. Then I had the about an hour and a half drive back home in the rainstorm. So I was home pissed about it all night, and the next day I went to the one close to my house to get the other stuff I was getting. Unfortunately, that one was out of the wine, which is why I didn't originally go there. They were pleasant as usual, actually beyond nice, and didn't even ID me, which just goes to show the other location was on some kind of power trip or something. Then I got an email from them to review my experience. They send it every time I go there, and I never do it. But I decided to select the location I had the bad experience at and give feedback on it. So I wrote exactly what happened, and then the next day, I got a call from the store manager. Turns out the guy that night was an assistant manager or something. However, he was much more pleasant than the woman that called me. She was extremely rude and condescending. She told me that she reviewed the cameras and that someone walked in with me at the same time, and that made us a party. I told her I didn't know them. She said it didn't matter, so apparently people can't walk into Total Wine at the same time as you. Then she said that the employees were watching me, and that the person left 30 minutes before I went to check out, and they saw it. Okay, so? Also, if that is the case and that is your policy, why didn't you say something when you saw the person leave? We could have cleared up the whole situation right then and there, instead of continuing to allow me to shop for another 30 minutes and waste my time, only to know that when I came to check out, you were going to deny it. So I told her that even if that is the case, someone can't leave a store, and she said, no, to complete the transaction, they would have to drive back with their ID. This made me extremely angry, because even if that is the case and that is your policy, at least you can offer an apology for the inconvenience or something like that. Not just call me to argue and stir the pot. I was already kind of over it because it had been like 2 days, but her whole attitude and nastiness about the whole thing were really an insult to injury, so I decided to look up their policy, and their policy clearly states that this only applies to parties at checkout. So the rule is who is with you at checkout, which makes sense, or is at least more understandable. Another policy I read, which was interesting, was that any online order not picked up within a week, they will issue a full refund to your original payment method. So my friends and I were sitting home drinking the stuff I had gotten at the other location later that day, and I was telling them what happened, and they were all shocked. I used to work retail for a long time, specifically during COVID, and I know what an inconvenience it is to set up big curbside pickup orders because they take up a lot of space on the order shelf. So drunk and mad, I decided to enforce their own policy on them and make a $10,000 order for the soonest possible pickup time, which they promise orders ready in 3 hours. So I made sure to order the cheapest, heaviest bottles I could think of so they could take up the most amount of space in their curbside area. I made sure to only order like 1 or 2 of each so they couldn't just give me a case. They had to get individual ones. I also ordered their whole supply of Tito's since it's popular, and it's the holidays, and I know people are going to be looking for it. This Total Wine has its curbside order section in the front, behind a counter where you can see it. And I know when customers saw it, they would ask for it. And then they would have to explain how someone ordered all 238 bottles, and they're back there on reserve. Then they'd probably get grouchy and ask for a manager. But the manager would be busy because I also made sure to order a lot of bottles behind glass so they would have to run around with their keys, scrambling to get this order ready. I worked retail and I know how much stuff like this throws off a schedule and annoys the managers. So I loaded up the cart and stopped when I got bored and placed the order. I got the email confirmation, which specified that you have to wait for the pickup confirmation email and that pickup times aren't guaranteed. So I thought for sure they were either going to cancel the order or call me or something. And something interesting that is sent with the email is a pickup policy that states specifically the recipient of the order needs to be 21. So you can have other people in your car, not 21? Well, 5 hours later, I got the pickup email. It took them longer, but I was still surprised. Then later, I got a pickup reminder email. Then 3 days later, a second reminder. Then 7 days later, I got my final notice email. And then, on day 10, I got a phone call. It was the manager acting like a completely different person this time, asking when I was coming for the order. At this point, I think she knew I was messing with them, because it had been 10 days, and she knew my name from the previous feedback thing. When she called, she asked for me by name, and my name was on the order, so I told her, yeah, I went to pick it up and was told I looked too young, so I just went to the other Total Wine and picked up the same stuff there. So then she was mad and said, are you seriously not coming to pick this up? Restock? I just said, nah. She hung up in my ducking arrogant opinion. When your higher-up asks you why your store had to refund someone $10,000, explain to them what you did. They were supposed to automatically cancel the order at the 7-day mark, but they didn't. She called me at the 10-day mark, so I called their customer service line to cancel it, and she told me some stores wait until the end of the month to do it. I'm assuming the manager was trying to hold out on refunding to end the year on a better number. Retail does that. I made them cancel it right then, in my ducking arrogant opinion. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened 8 months ago. My friend Kylan and I work in a woodworking company. It's a pretty great job for me as I love hands-on activity and creating things. Kylan, however, has more of a difficult time with it all, which is completely fine as I help him with it. His mom and my mom aren't necessarily close, but both support me and him in our work. We're pretty young, so it helps with reassurance. But a few days before this incident, I started to realize that Kylan's mom never really acknowledged my work. Now that's not really a big deal to me, as I don't require praise, but I do find it a bit weird, as Kai's mom has apparently had a few racial incidents at her own work, and I'm African. I was just assuming it's because she's afraid. I'm a pretty built guy and 6'6". Fast forward to Tuesday, and I'm working on a wooden chair that has taken me a few more attempts than wanted. The table saw I had been using to make clean cuts was pretty rusty from Kai using it constantly. I headed out to the department to get a replacement, and was a bit annoyed with Kai not doing it himself. I came back and said, "Hey man, don't be afraid to change your equipment." And he rolled his eyes and just replied with a K, which just annoyed me even more. I just pushed past it and continued, but minutes later, I heard Kai laughing, and I looked up to find him laughing at my cutting. This made me extremely upset, as I've been working almost day and night, while he only works 7-9 hours. This, along with his mom recently coming into the shop and laughing along with him. This got to me, and I walked over to Kai and told him a few words that I shouldn't have. He immediately got defensive and pushed me back, and I was about to strike back when his mom instantly joined in with him and intentionally pushed me to the left where the saw was. Stupidly, I left it on. As soon as I was pushed back, the back of my hand was shoved right into the saw, causing a drizzle of blood to gush everywhere, and for my palm to be basically split in half with a huge gap between my pinky and ring finger. The shock kicked in, and I instantly grabbed my hand and shouted for my mom, who was on the other side of the shop. She immediately got an ambulance, and I was sent to the closest hospital. Kai has been texting me almost every day apologizing for his mother. The only text from her was her saying that this was my fault and to not hurt her son. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm 33 weeks pregnant, and my mother-in-law finally asked who's going to be in the room. She hates the answer. Surprise, it's not going to be her. We just aren't close like that. Neither is her son, my fiancé, particularly close to her. In fact, for other reasons, he doesn't like to be around her. At 2 in the morning, I received the following text from her. She's at a casino, even though she's still jobless, so I would say there's a 95% chance she's drunk. So I've been thinking about asking you this for a while, and I finally mustered up the courage to ask. So here it is. Who do you have in the delivery room with you besides A, my fiancé, to help you and welcome E, unborn son, into this world? I responded with the following. Just AH, my son's godmother, will be in the waiting room with J, my son's godfather, in case he needs a break, someone to vent to, or needs to switch out for any reason. But since I'm scheduled for an induction and C-section, only one person can go back. As long as everything goes smoothly, people can meet him over FaceTime while at the hospital. I'm not sure how many visitors they allow, but I know they said I can have one person in the room while I'm giving birth and another outside ready to switch in case needed. Since I'm high risk for labor failure, they want to keep the number of people there to an absolute minimum. That includes likely having the same nurses, and Dr. Jet being on call to deliver Easton whenever I go into labor, so I'm most comfortable. I asked if Jay could sit in the waiting room in case A got too overwhelmed and needed a few, and they said that's fine. He just can't be in the room. And I have talked about it extensively, and would rather not have visitors in the actual hospital room unless they say he has to stay more than 24 hours. Then, at the hospital's discretion, immediate family can start visiting. They don't expect more than a 24-hour stay for him since he's perfectly healthy. It's me they're particularly worried about. I'm worried about them not letting him stay with me in the hospital and having to leave A all alone. But we haven't really gotten that far in the discussion because he refuses to talk about them separating us as a family. If I'm the only one in the hospital for more than 24 hours, at the hospital's discretion, immediate family is welcome. I would just prefer one at a time, and nobody under 13 should come to the hospital so I can rest. Everyone will get the text when it's okay to come see him, wherever we are. We'll probably be driving him to see people, as we'll need time to adjust to him being in the house, and we're worried about disturbances in that. She responded with this. So, can you swap out Jay with me? I would be honored to be A's tag partner if needed, and I want to be there anyway through the entire process. I want to take you guys there and be on the property the entire time for any and every reason necessary. I want to help in every single way I can, as well as be as close as possible to my little grandson when he makes his grand entrance. Is there a reason you didn't want me to be your plan B? I do not know how to respond to this while keeping the peace, especially with my fiancé asleep. I want to add that I was living with her and her family when I first got pregnant, because my mom died very suddenly last year. When she found out I was pregnant, she gave me 2 days to get out of her house and told me that she would pay for an abortion. I'm pro-choice, but that's not what I wanted. Every time I mention that we got pregnant shortly after miscarrying, she says, "Oh my God, I wanted to kill you guys." She loves her grandson. I do not doubt that. She's never been involved in the beginning of life with any of her grandkids, so I'm not sure if she realizes she's overstepping, but as a parent herself, I would think she would know. How do I approach this? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.